everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, August 28th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. And this week, we are going to be chatting with Mary Ellen Hannibal. Her book, Citizen Scientist: Searching for Heroes and Hope in an Age of Extinction, is now available on paperback, and we're going to talk a lot about citizen science and what it means for the globe, what it means for diversity, what it means for Mary Ellen personally, and really what it means to me as well. But before we dive into that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. I say it each week, and it bears repeating. Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and that's only because of support from listeners like you. I had a lot of great support this week. I want to thank specifically, let's see here, Herbert Drower. I want to also thank Rob Schreck, and I want to thank Christian Taylor for your support. Those individuals clicked through the PayPal portal, which is on carasantamaria.com, and pledged a one-time supportive payment for the show. And those of you who support the show on an episodic basis via my Patreon portal, I want to thank you as well, and I want to give you a specific shout-out. So let's see here. All right. I want to thank Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jeffrey Perez, Genji Keene, Charles Payette, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. And if you're wondering why I call out some of the same names each week, that's because they're pledging at a level that grants them a shout out on the show. But there are a lot of others who pledge at other levels. Maybe I can pick some in just kind of at random. I want to thank Lane Taylor and Lucy Maroney, also Hans Nilsson and Ashley Scroggins. I want to thank Jenica M., Luke Asink, and how about Eric Berg? And let's pick one more. Gosh, there's so many fun names to say. Gail Stanfill. Thank you guys all so much from the bottom of my heart. It's because of you that Talk Nerdy continues to happen week after week, even though I'm going back to school, even though I'm doing other jobs. And because of your support, I'm getting to the point where I may be able to start hiring a little bit of help. So maybe the audio engineering will be better than it has been up to this point. And perhaps I will be more consistent with uploading it at a certain time. If there's anything that you guys want to see me improve or change with the show, I'd love it if you would reach out and let me know. You can hit me up on social media at Cara Santa Maria on Twitter, Facebook.com/ScienceCara, or Cara_Santa_Maria on Instagram, although that'd be a weird place to hit me up with suggestions. Also at my website, you can sign up to get on the newsletter. I've never ever sent one, but I'm planning on starting soon. And you can shop in the Talk Nerdy store. You can do all sorts of things that support the show. Another really great way to support it, if you can't do it financially, which I don't expect you to by any stretch, is to just rate, review on iTunes, on different, feed readers where you download the podcast, Podcast One, all those different places. And also just tell your friends and family about it, because that is incredibly helpful. Okay, that's the end of my spiel. I'm really excited to dive into this week's episode. I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. Mary Ellen Hannibal is the author of Citizen Scientist: Searching for Heroes and Hope in an Age of Extinction. That book is now available on paperback, and you can find it anywhere books are sold. And I have a link to the Amazon post. A link to the link. Yeah, I have a link to the Amazon page for the book in the show notes for this episode. So grab yourselves a copy, guys. It's a really, really great read. And without any further ado, here she is, Mary Ellen Hannibal. Well, Mary Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's really my pleasure, Cara. Thank you.
Well, I am really excited to talk about your new book, Citizen Scientist: Searching for Heroes and Hope in an Age of Extinction. And I have to say, this really is a beautiful book, and it focuses on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, which is sort of the democratization of science, and how science is not just in the ivory towers, but it's real people that are making super important discoveries every day across the globe.
It's so right, Cara. I mean, I think that, as much as citizen science is rocking and rolling and really kind of expanding every minute, we have not even begun to unpack really the potential for what it can do and will do it's kind of like, technology itself. There's really no stopping it and what it can do, and it's available. And I have a little frustration sometimes. I think people hear the word citizen science and think that it sounds like a cute thing for kids.
Yeah.
Which kind of it is in a way, but it actually takes a certain amount of doing to make it appropriate for kids. But it's really more in the biggest picture, this really kind of an exploding idea of how we collect knowledge, how we create knowledge, and then what we do with it. Mm-hmm. And it is available to everyone, and also it is really so impactful when a lot of people are doing it together. And that is just really different than our model of science has been.
Absolutely. And I even see, I was recently at an event, and I won't name the individuals and I won't name the organization, but it was a long-standing organization that does an incredible amount of work for science, and and I think they were forward-thinking enough to bring in some science communicators, like modern science communicators. I was there. A couple YouTubers were there. Actually, one YouTuber was there, and it was a big kind of think tank work group about how the public perceives science. And I remember in one of the sessions, the idea of citizen science came up, and I was flabbergasted that there were old school scientists in the room who were like, I don't like this term. I think we need to come up with a new term. Calling it citizen science makes it seem like they're actually doing science. The scientists are doing science, and the citizens are just, like collecting data. And we were all like, what do you think science is? Like, are you kidding me with this right now?
Well, it's really pretty funny. I mean, I know those guys.
Yeah, right? Guys, exactly.
It is guys. And there is a long-standing saying that science advances one corpse at a time. Uh-huh. And I think that there's really a lot of truth to it. That it's not easy to be a scientist as a career, and it's a long, drawn-out fight. What's really fascinating about science, I just read a book about earthquakes, and the science behind understanding plate tectonics was something that took decades to kind of consolidate and be accepted and understood as how the Earth works. And there was a lot of fighting about it, and it takes decades of fighting and people saying, no, it's this way, no, it's that way, and then some scientists testing something this way and some testing it that way. And then over time there becomes a cohesion and an agreement that yes, plate tectonics is how the Earth forms and moves. And it's sort of the same. I mean, the thing about citizen science and kind of the broadest swath of what it is really just the boutique science that those guys are holding on to writ large. It still is about hypothesis testing. It's just that instead of having very small sites to do your experiments on, we're talking about gathering data at vast scales over time and space to ask kind of different questions and questions that are very, very imperative for us to know the answers to now, or for us to investigate as we cope with this unprecedented loss of species, of pure loss of animal bodies, of climate change, of just incredible rapid change in our biosphere. We can't answer those questions. We can't grapple with those things in a plot of land, in a little exclosure that is, the size of a half of a football field. It's just not going to tell you at the right scale what's going on. And then at the same time, just to go back and touch back to, I think, your incredibly important, apprehension of the heart and soul of citizen science is it is an incredible democratizing tool. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we have to grapple with in Western science is that it has been used as a tool of colonization and exploitation, and it has benefited only some people at the expense quite often of others. And a lot of the way that has happened is by people owning territory, claiming territories, taking it away from other people, claiming knowledge, having specialized knowledge that is not available to other people. And this is now, the lid is pulled off of that, and there's no going back.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the just quantity, not to mention the quality of data collection that's possible when you have eyes trained on the sky, eyes trained in the water, eyes trained on nature around us, when you have boots on the ground from individuals all over the globe who are able to take photographs, who are able to write down their observations. I mean, it just doesn't compare to the small kind of fraction of observations that professional trained scientists are allowed to make. And if we think about it historically, most of the individuals who made like massive impacts on our scientific knowledge today, like Darwin himself, was not a trained scientist. He was a quote unquote naturalist, meaning he was a guy that was super interested in, observing nature around him, and he figured out how to get enough money or to get paid enough to go out on these expeditions and just draw and write and collect samples. But he was not a scientist in the most traditional sense of the word.
And I think, Cara, that's really right. Darwin is my citizen scientist exemplar, and I think people that when scientists say that they're resisting that term citizen science, they're kind of missing a point. Like, they're all hired by somebody, and it is not easy again to be a scientist, get funding, get approval for the kinds of work they want to do, and this is something that actually Darwin was free of, because he married a wealthy woman, one of the heiresses to the Wedgwood China fortune, and he was independently wealthy, so he did not need to make a living. But then that also freed him intellectually to just be as broad in his thinking as he wanted to be, and to be as obsessed with what he was observing in a very intellectually honest way. He was never compromised by having to try to frame something so that it would get published by Nature or by Science. And he was never having to frame his work so that other people would support it. I mean, he wanted support, he got support, he also got tremendous opposition, and he still does, obviously, but he was free. And that's, few of us are free in our lives entirely from needing to make a living. But as we can be amateur scientists, in addition to our regular jobs, we are free to ask whatever questions we want, and we have tools to actually be able to ask them in a meaningful way. I will point out one thing that I like to emphasize, and sometimes I forget to do it. If you do want to be a citizen scientist, don't make up your own database. Use a database that's already in existence. I really love, and I always promote this app and web-based platform called iNaturalist.
Yeah.
And iNaturalist, you put it on your phone, you take observations of plants and animals, and then this, of course, aggregates to huge patterns that we can see across time and space as people all over the world are doing the same thing over time. But the thing is that it all goes through iNaturalist, is a highly vetted program for an expert-based validation system. So the data is useful not only by you in whatever you might be interested in inquiring about, but by people everywhere. And also into the future, there will be questions that people will have about what we know about nature today that we can't even foresee. And one example of that, my book, one of the things that I really try to do as a writer in everything that I do is understand the science myself and then recontextualize it through a broader lens of literary, historical, and personal narrative. And when I was researching The Citizen Scientist, one of the things that happened was the very first citizen science project I started to go on for researching this book in particular was this, and still is, I still do it, this tide pool monitoring in Half Moon Bay here with the California Academy of Sciences.
Yeah.
And the first time we went out, we found 70 different sea stars, formerly known as starfish, in one plot and 50 in another. And 2 months later, they were gone, zero, the victims of this massive sea star wasting. It's the biggest marine die-off known to human history, going on still right now from Alaska to Baja. And one thing I was including historical figures as I have in my book, and one of them is Ed Ricketts. And Ed Ricketts was John Steinbeck's great friend, the model for Doc in Cannery Row, and many other kind of wise man figures in his fiction. And Ricketts was an amateur biologist. He dropped out of the University of Chicago twice. He made a living selling specimens from the tide pool to universities for their labs. And he took several expeditions, one of them was with Joseph Campbell, who's the world mythologizer eventually, but this was before he became that. And they collected specimens up in Sitka, Alaska. Now, those specimens that they collected have allowed researchers today to compare what is going on in Sitka today with change over time, and they have a marker because of the specimens that Ed Ricketts and Joseph Campbell collected.
Gotcha.
So Ed Ricketts and Joseph Campbell had no idea that they were actually really paying. They knew that they were paying something forward to science because that's why you collect specimens, but they didn't have any idea that, in less than 100 years, we would have such incredible human impacts on biodiversity that there would be this massive sea star wasting happening that no one knows the exact reasons for why it's happening, and they would be helping to figure that out because they have contributed to the question. And that's that's really the spirit of collaboration, not only across different kinds of people working all together right now on the globe, but over time. 100 years from now, the observations you make are going to help people answer questions that we can't even formulate them. We can't even anticipate them.
It's just stunning. It's fascinating how I think a lot of times we think of citizen science as like a modern convention, because of apps and because of websites, just because of the connectivity through the internet. Things like iNaturalist, which you mentioned and I've mentioned multiple times on the show. It's kind of the one way that I maintain my connection to citizen science is when I live right next to Griffith Park in Los Angeles. So there are
that's great.
Yeah, there's like coyotes and like snakes, and my dog got sprayed in the face by a skunk the other day.
Wow.
Which was not fun, but I can tag that those things are happening on iNaturalist.
That's great.
And it's just wonderful. But the truth of the matter is there's this really deep and lovely historical perspective that you offer in your book, along with the modern stories as well, that I think we sometimes forget. Citizen science is not new. It's actually as old as science itself, if not older.
It is way older than science itself, because what we call science is really a Western European scientific tradition. And, one category of citizen science, there's several categories. I take the broadest possible view of what is citizen science. And there's a category called co-creation, which goes to the heart of the democratic dimension that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And co-creation is where you don't just have a question that is posed by a scientist who marches into the territory or the world of another people or somebody else's land and says, I want to study X on your land or on your resources, can I do it? Mm-hmm. The scientist says, actually, I want to study that, but what do you want to do with me? Is there a question you would like to ask? Can we co-create a project where we're asking multiple questions? So I'm looking around for, what's going to be the co-created project that I write about for citizen scientists. And the one that I found has really had just a hugely profound impact on me as a person and on me and on my book. I really restructured it as a result of having the experience of reporting on this. And this is the Amamutsun tribal band, which is a Native American people in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And an archaeologist working for California State Parks quite a few years ago uncovered what is called Krorosti, or the Big House, which is the remains of where Portola made first contact, quote unquote, with the natives in the Santa Cruz Mountains in 1769. Now, everywhere in the world, we can put a marker. And some places the marker is just being laid down right now, and in some places it goes back thousands of years in places like in South America. But in California, we can put down a marker of when our ecological systems started to be unraveled, and that is 1769, when the Spanish came in and took over the land and stopped the Native American lifeways from going forward. And Native Californians were cultivating the landscape in a way that did not deplete populations of wild animals. Yeah. They kept the wild wild. Now we are at pains to understand how could you do that, because what we do is we take away territory from wild animals by creating, housing complexes or agriculture in their habitat, or we domesticate animals like cows and sheep and dogs. And that's what we do to animals. We don't know how to keep them wild and coexist with them. But Native Californians were able to do that. So the Portola comes in, destroys the native culture essentially, which was really doesn't destroy it entirely, because it's still here, it's still going on, and there's still people practicing what's called traditional ecological knowledge. And the Amamutsan people in particular lost the history of their own practices. So an archaeologist said, we want to study Quirosty, the big house, because we want to understand what went on here for archaeological purposes. And they said to the Amamutsan people, what do you want to know? And they said, we want to restore our cultural lifeways. So we want to know what those were. And so what's been profound to me is that as I've watched the archaeologists and the native people work together, the questions that the native people have and the way that they purpose the information that's revealed through helping with the archaeology has really changed how the archaeologists view what they're doing. So it's not just like, okay, you're doing a side project. They are actually really changing how the archaeologists see what they are doing. And because it is really changing our notion of how humans have interacted on the landscape. And this is another profound dimension of this is, we tend to think of ourselves as separate from nature, or we think of ourselves as bad actors on the natural stage, right? We're polluters, we're consumers, we're decimators. But actually we have a role in the ecosystem, and we can use it to be part of it in a healthy way, which is what Native Californians were doing. So it's just, there's so much to be uncovered here that, the world needs this information, and we're desperate for this information. And only citizen science is going to help us actually uncover it and then disseminate it for people that are really committed to using it.
Absolutely. And the truth is, I think that we can interact in various ways. I've had, I'm remembering back to an episode that I did with Beth Pratt, who is, she runs the California
chapter.
Friend. Yeah, she's great, of the National Wildlife Federation. And in that episode, those of you who hadn't heard it, we talked quite a bit about, living with these beautiful ghost cats of California, the pumas that live in the mountains, but also a lot of the different animals. We live in Los Angeles, or I live in Los Angeles. She lives in Yosemite. She lives full on in nature.
She has a dream job. She has a dream job. She lives in Yosemite.
Yeah. And she's surrounded by nature all the time. But I live in the heart of LA. I do have this beautiful city park that's quite small, but quite ecologically diverse behind me, so I'm very lucky in that sense. But there are people that live in downtown LA, that live in the middle of New York, who can have nature and incorporate nature and invite nature into their lives. Even if you don't live in Central Park, if you just put out a flower box on your window or your fire escape, you might be able to attract pollinators and hummingbirds and things of that nature. And so not only can you sort of create a small mecca for nature just in whatever situation you're in, whether you live in a studio apartment or you live in a home where you can actually build out a wildlife sanctuary in your yard. So not only can you do that, but then you can monitor these things, you can record them, you can go everywhere from intensely, monitoring with camera traps and really going hard into it, to just once in a while, when you see a cool bug or bird or flower, taking a photo and posting it online. It can be that simple.
It really is that simple. And with habitat, as you mentioned, if you build it, they will come quite often. And also, if you do even put a flower box on your windowsill, and you put some native plants in there, and so you get some native pollinators, it's not even just the pollinators right there that you get to see that you're helping. You're actually creating connectivity across the landscape for those creatures. Butterflies, bees, birds, they all need to move across the landscape, and they need to have, it's like rest stops along the way. They need to have gas stations.
Yeah.
And you creating that habitat is really significant for creating that connectivity. Here's another way to look at citizen science. Beth's book is When Mountain Lions Are Neighbors, and I really love the book because it's very positive. She really focuses on a lot of success stories for creatures that were, on the brink of extinction coming back, and people really co-living with other creatures. But sometimes it's hard. So, for example, in San Francisco, we have coyotes in the Presidio, which is a park. Mm-hmm. And one of the head wildlife biologists there tells me that, they have tons of complaints all the time from people with dogs who are taking their dogs on walks, and then they have like a confrontation with the coyote, and they want them to destroy the coyotes and get them out of the Presidio.
Yeah.
And so, but he reminds them that the coyotes are actually keeping the rat population in the city under control. And this is where an understanding of what actually biodiversity is doing for us at multiple scales needs to be made visually and spatially explicit, so that when we make decisions about how to manage where we live, or the lands that are adjacent to where we live, or even the wilderness, we have a full understanding of everything that's going on. So you might think in a very linear way, okay, coyotes are threatening my dog, I don't want them. But if you don't have your rat population controlled, not only are rats going to perhaps proliferate out of control, but rats are then disease vectors.
Yeah.
And so they, and there's a lot of what we would call hardcore pure science showing this correlation of when you have a full set of the whole food web on the landscape, meaning top predators like coyotes, they're mesopredators, but in many ecosystems they are the top predator. Herbivores like elephants, you have a control of the population of rodents, and it keeps the ecosystem in balance. And it goes all the way down to viruses. Mm-hmm. So, I did a Stanford TEDx talk, and, there's this big number on the stage counting down. And I looked at it at one point in the middle of my talk, and I jumped over a detail that I really wanted to convey. So I, in the talk, say that even worse, perhaps, than the sixth mass extinction of plants and animals that's happening now is this vast reduction in the number of bodies of wildlife. So since the 1970s, we've lost nearly 40% of the number of bodies of birds and mammals, amphibians, and reptiles, etc. And this is due to habitat conversion, mostly to make way for human populations.
Yeah.
Now, you can ask yourself, why do we need all those bodies of plants and animals on the landscape? I live in San Francisco. We have plenty of greenery, don't we? But here's the answer. Here's one way. There's many reasons why we need it. So let's just say the Amazon. The Amazon is getting cut down at this vastly accelerated rate. Of course, that's bad for many reasons. It's the lungs of the earth. We need them more than ever, sequestering carbon, doing everything that is mitigating climate change. But here's another thing. There's this vast tree of life, and all life forms share common ancestry. And it's not just plants and animals that are on this vast tree of life. There's viruses on this vast tree of life. And in the Amazon, for example, there are plants and animals that have co-evolved or learned how to live side by side with viruses over, millions of years, so that the viruses don't kill them. But they evolved in a place over time. Cut down the Amazon, the plants and the animals, the host is gone, the virus is still there. The virus is looking around for a host and finds a super abundant, warm-blooded mammal called a person. Hello Zika, hello Ebola.
Yeah.
These are the things that we're online to have a lot more of if we don't stop depleting the world of plants and animals. But to quantify that so that you can actually make a case for it, you need data. you need a lot of data, and you need it over time, and you need it over big areas. And this is where no scientist can get this on their own. So this is really like a moral call to being a citizen scientist, because we're helping to really create this deep, deep picture of what's going on in biodiversity and why we need it.
Absolutely. And a lot of that data that's needed is actually in cities. It's actually in places where we sort of have this idea in our minds that we are not nature, or that nature is other, that nature is like in Africa or the Amazon or somewhere where we aren't. But yet, obviously, there is a biome everywhere you look. Like, ecology exists everywhere. And, you know, as Jurassic Park so eloquently put it, life will find a way. I mean, when you look down at a crack in the sidewalk, there are weeds and other plants growing up through it. There are insects everywhere. There is, and like here in Los Angeles, like you mentioned Beth's book, there are these beautiful kind of like charismatic megafauna that are living right next door. And you sort of mentioned this idea of the ecological balance being maintained when nature is given or allowed to thrive, kind of when we lay off with our pressures that we're putting on nature. And one of the ways that we really screw that up is sort of the bottom-up way. You mentioned if we, get rid of all of the coyotes, then the rats will thrive. But also, if we put out rat poison, then we're actually killing everything up the food chain. And this has been a huge problem here in Los Angeles, where, you know, our most famous mountain lion, P22, who lives in Griffith Park, had to be captured and treated for the effects of rat poison, for mange. Like, he could have died because of this. And we see cats dying all the time. We see coyotes dying all the time because they eat the rats that have eaten the poison. And it's so sad. Like, it's one thing when we're like, oh yeah, we're just killing rats. And then when you see it on the face of this beautiful creature, it's really depressing.
It's awful. And, you know, people are not aware that that everything is connected, that there is a food web. As you say, it totally operates within cities, within very, very urban areas. I've been working on a really fun project here in San Francisco with a bunch of people from all sorts of different institutions, from the California Academy of Sciences, the Exploratorium, the Department of the Environment, the Department of Public Works, and we're making a map of nature in the city, and in the city of San Francisco. And it's really so much fun. It's also really so interesting because there's a lot of restoration projects. You can bring back native habitat. A lot of places we have done it. You know, Los Angeles has done some amazing restoration work and is a leader in looking for, you know, environmentally, ecologically friendly solutions to development. There's something called the Natural Capital Project, which is founded by professor at Stanford, Gretchen Daly. And the Natural Capital Project really looks to, you know, developing cities and where development is going to happen with, you know, using natural infrastructure like creeks, waterways, marshes, as helps and as performing functions that the built solutions to are much more expensive and also don't last as long. So it's a creative thing, it's a creative way, and it's better for everybody. You know, it's better. There's tons of research about how much, you know, your learning, your clarity, your mental health is all much better when there's vibrant nature around you. One thing about the whole urban nature thing, though, that bugs me sometimes when I read like articles about it, you know, people will say, well, you know, there's speciation, we're maybe losing species in the wild, but there's speciation happening right in the city because there's new bugs all the time, there's new microbes in the city. And it's true that there are new bugs and new snails, you know, speciating in cities. These are not equivalent to large-bodied mammals or to birds that have evolved over millions of years. And it's not an equivalency to taking them out in the wild and then having a new snail appear. In general, you know, the bigger the body, the longer it took to evolve. And you can't just take out the big bodies and they're not going to evolve. there's not going to be an evolution that brings back another big body after that. So that's just the one thing of not getting complacent about also really needing to protect wilderness for what's valuable in wilderness that we don't have in the cities.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's such an important point to be made. um, coming back to this idea of being a citizen scientist, engaging and contributing to the scientific body of knowledge, of literature, of data. Your book focuses quite a bit on citizen science in nature, and it also has quite a bit of like beautiful memoir, and I want to get back to that. I do want to make a side note that there are obviously other types of citizen science as well. There are citizen science projects where you can help categorize galaxies, and there are citizen science projects where you can, contribute to like astronomical studies. You contribute to neuroscience studies where you help identify certain types of neurons, because there's just a bunch of data and it hasn't been fully analyzed, and computers aren't good enough at analyzing it yet, that we need real people with real eyes to be involved in doing that. So a lot of scientists have done a great job of like gamifying citizen science approaches so that people can just log onto their computer and play a game, and what you're really doing is contributing as well.
There's tons of stuff like that on all different things, and I think it's all really great and really fun. This would be a case of where, like the naysayer will say that is not citizen science, because that's basically cataloging.
Yeah.
And there's no question that the citizen is not asking a question or analyzing data. The citizen is really just cataloging pieces of data. Oh well, whatever, call it what you will. It's really, the point is to engage where it's fun and interesting for you. And for some people that's going to be cataloging. There's nothing wrong with that. And then in many cases, there's people who seem to be just cataloging who end up observing patterns that become very consequential.
Yeah.
There's a book out called The Glass Universe by Davis Sobel.
Yes, I had her on the podcast too, and it was so great.
I'll have to listen to it.
Yeah. Oh
fabulous.
My gosh, she's wonderful.
She's a lovely person. And, some of these women, they were citizen scientists. Some of them had PhDs eventually, but they started to notice patterns that actually have contributed hugely to what we understand about what's going on in the celestial sphere.
Absolutely, yes. So incredibly important. I mean, fundamentally kind of underlied a lot of the astronomical understanding that we have today. And that's, that's the thing we have to remember, is that historically there were like societal barriers, there were cultural barriers, there were ethnic barriers and gender barriers to people actually getting the piece of paper that they may have needed to quote unquote legitimize them. But that doesn't mean that they or you or anybody doesn't have the actual skills and the know-how and the right stuff to be able to contribute. Like, I love that that citizen science breaks the barriers of like the ivory tower mentality, the untouchable mentality of academic science, because obviously one of the problems underlying modern society is that there's a haves and a haves not issue. And it's the same thing as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about colonialism. It's the same thing with knowledge. Like, your everyday person doesn't feel empowered to know the things that are quite knowable. And that's simply because all those things are tied up in a lot of, a lot of fanfare and a lot of almost arrogance and just this kind of unbreachable facade. But that doesn't need to be there. I mean, that's why you do what you do and I do what I do, is to try and sort of make those distinctions a little bit more wiggly.
I completely agree. I will also say that, we need the PhD scientists, and they can do things that the rest of us can't do. And, frankly, don't want to do. If we did,
Absolutely.
we would go get the freaking PhD. Because, it's a grind, right? I mean, it's not easy. And they're like doctors, it's kind of like you can get a hold of your health, and you can be healthy, and you can be really interested in your own nutrition, your own performance. Like, if you want a Fitbit, you don't need a medical degree for that. But, some things you do need a medical degree for, and you're glad to have that surgeon know how to do brain surgery when that's what you need. And that's what a PhD scientist often really is, something like a doctor. But it's not, they don't own everything. They don't have all the knowledge, and they often just don't even ask the right questions. They're asking questions that are important in a way and that do end up mattering. But we have so much of a bigger problem here. We have so much of a bigger way of comprehending how our society, how our world is unfolding. And, this part of the problem is saying everybody only has a narrow question, or like whatever your job is. Nope, you have every right to question the whole big thing, the whole enchilada, and just ask questions about it.
Absolutely.
Well, like I do, science is, even biodiversity, not everybody cares about it because they don't know about it. Not everybody's going to pick up a book or get involved in reading about it. Some people are. Love those people. They're my tribe. But since we are, I really do feel passionately committed to doing everything that I can and using all of the tools at my disposal and reaching past my own capacities to increase my ability to connect with people about why all this really matters. And I understand, and my background really is, I was an English major in college. I was a book review editor, a travel editor. I'm kind of a resolutely, liberal arts, humanities kind of person, not really a science person. Although I think it's been 20 years now I've really been focused on science. But science became interesting to me in the context of history, actually. But then, so on the citizen science book, I'm writing it, and I'm thinking, how am I going to make this narrative broader so that people have an emotional connection to it? And part of that led me to John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, and Joseph Campbell, because these are people that really tried very much in different ways to integrate scientific knowledge and inquiry into other ways of seeing and knowing. This wonderful book by Ricketts and Steinbeck, The Sea of Cortez, is just an incredible book of really trying to put science, history, and personal observation together. That's the heart of citizen science. And then Joseph Campbell, who maybe younger people don't know him, but he was really big in the 90s, and he wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And then he became very famous when Bill Moyers did a PBS special on him called The Power of Myth. Mm-hmm. And Joseph Campbell was this world mythologizer who he amassed this vast library of knowledge about mythology and said there's essentially the same story being told over and over again through all cultures and across all time. And that is the hero, the story of the hero. Now, I'm reading about Campbell, who always said he was hugely influenced by Ed Ricketts and by this idea of biology being where mythology comes from. He said mythology is nature speaking. This is what all of our culture comes out of the body, out of the physical reality. So I'm reading this Campbell, and I just realized that I was experiencing what Joseph Campbell had been saying one should do, and my father was actually putting himself in alignment with his own death. He was allowing himself to die by really, with Ernest Hemingway helping him. Mm-hmm. And the Hemingway story, Big Heart, Two-Hearted River, was really about this soldier who's been traumatized by World War II, putting himself back in alignment with nature to heal. And it just was uncanny that it felt like I was living the very things I was trying to explain in my book. And then I just felt like this is so powerful for me. And it was expanding how I felt about myself in the world. And especially, I actually, after my father died, I called up several friends whose parents have died, and I said, my sympathy card was not really adequate, because when you lose a parent, it's not just a personal loss, really. It's also like you take up a different place, in the universe now. Without the parent, you are it. And it made me feel just very specifically my place in the time-space continuum, and to really, really want to even more understand and help people understand that we're not here just now. We're here because millions of generations of different organisms have come before us. Life is generational. It happens by reproduction, one after the other. It's a parent-child thing for basically most life forms, and that's what we need to keep going here, so that what Darwin called endless forms most beautiful will continue to unfold. And it all dovetailed. So I really integrated that into the narrative, hoping to really make something called science more personal to people, and maybe more interesting to people who don't think it's interesting.
I love that. I mean, I love it when I am reading a book about science and there is a very personal angle to it. Most of my bookshelves are full of nonfiction books that have at least some scientific angle. It's my passion and it's what I do. And so I read about it quite often. And sometimes I think science writers don't want to put themselves in the story, and I think that that's completely fair, and I think that there's good reason for that sometimes. And sometimes they do, and I think that is also completely fair. But when there is a personal thread throughout a story, there is something to be said, I think, about the connection that you have with the author. And I think there's also something really to be said when a science story, a science book, a tome, includes something human. Because science can be a bit esoteric, especially when we're getting into things like theoretical astrophysics or, different specific fields. It can feel very esoteric, but when there is this very human narrative component to it, I think it connects us in a way that's almost like really necessary. Like we evolve to be connected to those types of stories.
I agree. I mean, I feel like that's, storytelling is really on our hard drive, and we connect with other humans pretty readily, and we recognize experiences that each other have, like loss.
Yeah.
And when someone loses somebody, that's a universal experience. We all will experience that. Most of us have. And then, Cara, another thing about it with citizen science, going back to, the Amundsen and how, when the Spanish made first contact, and then when California became part of the United States, part of how that was able to happen is because the experience of Native Americans was discounted.
Mm-hmm.
That those people were denied their subjectivity and their objectivity. And now today in our world, we've got all these culture wars going on where there's a big struggle over who gets to have subjectivity and then other people wanting to continue to objectify other people.
Yeah.
And we understand really that we all have subjectivity, and that even though we are data points, that we have a personal stake in that. And this is where citizen science, like when you make science your own and you put together the things that make the narrative for you, you are helping to create a more accurate picture of what this whole world is. I mean, it's amazing that we all have our subjective perspectives. It's it's difficult to integrate subjective perspectives, like in this setting of when there's a fight over a piece of land. Lots of Native American and Native, indigenous people use mapping to create maps. So putting data points on maps of where sacred sites are, mm-hmm. where natural resources are, like oil or fish populations, where things of value, how the whole network of what we consider a place, what that is made of. And that the stories that go in those maps about history and what happened to people have value just in the same way like oil reserves or copper reserves have too. And we're not going to be able to make the right kinds of decisions going forward about any kind of natural resource unless we really see the bigger picture, and that includes the subjective one.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that is not usually included. I mean, it's so sad that it's such a rare topic that, people like Howard Zinn sort of made it famous, right? Like the people's history. Like, obviously looking at it through the eyes of the individuals who maybe weren't in power, and definitely the eyes of the individuals who were not the imperialists, but those who the colonialists kind of came into their land. Like, the people who actually have a much deeper connection with nature and a much more, I think, knowledgeable perspective. It's the same reason that when you look back to these sort of like British and Spanish and Italian and Roman individuals who would go on these expeditions, that they would work with a native person, like a native naturalist.
Yes,
they
right.
needed them to help them. And we do that even to this day. Like when I'm on a shoot for a television show and I'm in a new country where I don't speak the language, like you're with a fixer. You're with an individual who can help you translate and who can show you the right places to go and can help you get the interviews that you need. I mean, it's
called local knowledge.
Absolutely. And the fact that we completely leave this out of our stories and our narratives is like not only just kind of gross, but it's also not doing anybody a service because we're leaving out so much breadth of knowledge.
We are, and we really need that breadth of knowledge now. We really, really need it. We've cut it out. We've been very expedient about how we use knowledge and what we do with resources. And look, we're in a very big bad fix right now. So how are we going to learn our way out of it? How are we going to connect ourselves again, reconnect ourselves? And, of course, even just saying those words, we know that has great personal satisfaction as well as really bigger impact. When you're able to make these connections, this is what we want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay, I know that you have some appointments that you need to get to, and I've taken up a fair amount of your time. I do close every episode asking my guests the same two questions, and I was hoping that you'd be willing to share with us your answers.
Absolutely.
All right, great. So the first one that I always ask is, when you think about the future in whatever perspective you've sort of taken on today or at this minute, whether it's your future, the future of your family, your community, or something more global, what is the thing that most concerns you? What keeps you up the most at night? What are you actively kind of depressed about? But B, what are you really hopeful for and optimistic about and feeling kind of excited and empowered?
Well, thank you for that double question. I am really obsessed with loss of biodiversity and extinction. We're going forward, putting a couple billion more people on the earth by 2040 or whatever the demographers say. How are we going to do that without depleting wildlife? Now, extinction is a huge problem because it is the end of the line for a lineage, and it will never come again. And I find this unacceptable. I just find this completely unacceptable, morally unacceptable. And many, many morally unacceptable things have happened in human history and, happening probably right this minute. But we know what we're doing, and we need to not do it. We need to figure that out. I am cautiously optimistic that we will figure it out and that we will find ways to squeak through this pinch point, this inflection point, and do right by nature. Now, I think what's going to happen is it's going to be vastly reduced, probably to some big areas that eventually people will not be allowed to go onto at all, because we will need so badly to keep these life systems going that we'll have to really, really limit human impacts to the degree we can. With climate change, we can't stop that, right? And that's ubiquitous. There's no way you can say, okay, we're going to save you from climate change, because that can't happen. So I think I interviewed Richard Dawkins a couple weeks ago for the Commonwealth Club here in San Francisco, and so I was reading his books again. I know you're a fan of his. And I keep thinking of that, something that he has said over and over again, which is that we are perfectly adapted to the past.
Yeah.
We are not adapted to the present, and we are not adapted to the future. And when I talked with him, we also talked about how putting lots more people on, and then with the acceleration of technology, there are emerging qualities. Like the internet is an emerging quality in his definition. And then this increases exponentially the rate of further change, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of scary, but at the same time, it could possibly mean that the positive ways forward are also going to accelerate. And this I pray for.
Absolutely. Oh, I love your answers. They're so well thought out. And, obviously, this is what you do, and these are the topics that you write about quite often, because you obviously are not just an author in the sense that you don't just write books, but you're also a journalist. You write for a lot of outlets, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I'm constantly trying to think of, and you can totally relate to this, where is the story? Mm-hmm. Where is the story? Where is the story that is really what will open just this door in people's minds or in their heart to this major, big freaking deal that's going on? I think if we were really doing what we needed to do, if we were really confronting what's going on, every time you looked at the front page of the New York Times, there would be a report on the planet today.
Yeah.
What's happening? And it's like a special cause. The environment is still considered like a special, separate subject. And that's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And to that point, at the risk of going on too long, I've been thinking about the March for Science, and I've been thinking about the media as actually culpable in this anti-science feeling. Because although the media stepped up big time to say we are in favor of knowledge, we're in favor of research, we're in favor of science, they actually are not so much in favor of science. They actually don't like the word very much, really. Mm-hmm. They, if you look at the New York Times book review section, you and I both read all of the nonfiction books.
Yeah.
But, most of it is fiction, and some of it is fantastic fiction. I love fiction, don't get me wrong, but most of it is just obsessed with human relationships.
Yeah.
and human identity. And you know what? It's just like the subject is not that anymore. Humans have become a geophysical force. There's really practically no such thing as an important individual, even if you are Mark Zuckerberg, because he put into motion something much bigger than himself, and that almost doesn't need him, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it's at. So when are we going to be able to grapple with a new sense of identity in which we are connected not only to all kinds of different people, but to all different kinds of species and to processes of seasons and ecological interactions that occur over time?
It's so true. And that's why the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. You know, you write a book about citizen science because you're passionate about the subject and it needs to be read. And you make it entertaining and you make it endlessly readable. But you also know that this was not a formulaic, premeditated choice to make a bestseller. You didn't think like, oh, what will sell? What will just fly off the shelves immediately? Like there are ways to just plan and produce something that is clickbait. But because you care about the topic and because you know how important it is for not just humanity, but for the globe writ large, like for the entire ecosystem, this is a topic that you wrote, and luckily you're so good at it that people are reading it, which is so important. So guys, I highly recommend that you pick up Mary Ellen Hannibal's copy of Citizen Scientists: Searching for Heroes and Hope in an Age of Extinction. And Mary Ellen, thank you so much for sharing the story with us today.
Thank you, Cara. It's so much fun to talk with you and to be in the same tribe, working for the same things.
Absolutely. What a pleasure. And hey, everyone listening, thank you as well for being in that tribe with us and working towards the same thing. And thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.